himself up to give the presentation here, Dr. Dale Simpson.
Going all space age here. Good evening, everyone. How are we doing? Can you hear me in the back there?
Yep.
How about in the snack room? Can you hear me back there? Say me something back there if you can. That would be great. Well, thank you very much for coming out here. I really appreciate the time to come out to St. Chuck's and talk a little bit about just the deep time you have in your city, and to talk a little bit in general about Illinois archaeology, and then we'll sort of go from the macro and then into the micro, and we'll look at some artifacts here. I also want to talk a little bit about Native Americans and our traditional custodians. It seems to be a popular topic, but it's sort of sensitive, so we want to always pay our respects. I think the Prez did a great job just sort of introducing me that way, but I figure I would show you another way of who I am through, if this thing will go on me. Here we go, boom, maybe. Let's see how this works. So, I'm Dale Simpson. I was a wrestler growing up. I started when I was in 6th grade, and I continued through college. I was an All-American in 1995, and I got a wrestling scholarship to go to Canada. Then my junior year, I had to go into field school, and I went to Easter Island. Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, it's in the Triangle of Polynesia. It's about 2,300 miles from the coast. It has the very famous 1,000 Moai statues throughout the island. It's one of the most magical places in the world. I'm most interested in archaeology, the study of material culture, past artifacts, past lifeways. My father always tried to teach me, if you really want to know someone, you got to know where they came from. And that always sparked my interest in the past. Does that say Abraham Lincoln? How do we get from China to Kentucky? You got any ideas on that?
No, I don't, except the Indian trade, maybe.
And there it is.
Wow.
Tiny little thing.
That's much smaller than I thought. I want an owner with passion who wants to know just as much about the artifact as I do. Do you have any other ideas of how this could have ended up in your field?
I think it's aliens.
On the Found team, my role is to better understand the timeline of how things come in, how they're made within that timeline, and then to give an interpretation. One of my favorite things to do is travel and see the world. I think I definitely have the traveler's gene that people say are in people. I keep learning, and that's always what I want to do the rest of my life. So this was from a TV show on the History Channel called Found. I think right now, actually, you can see it on Hulu. They do some sort of replays on it. I don't get any money for that stuff. You know, you'd think I'd get some residuals, but that doesn't happen. And in that program, they actually made some Lego figures, and it's like my claim to fame. I guess that's what I sort of look like in Lego form, a mean guy carrying a shovel. There's another show I've been on called What on Earth? It's sort of a cool remote sensing show that uses like Google Maps and satellites and zooms into areas if you've seen it. And that was quite fun. But I think the best part that I like is was with iFit and Nordic Track. Just as we were talking about here, what Steve was saying, basically, I make people sweat, but we get to walk around and look at some of the awesome features on Easter Island. Per capita, there's more archaeological remains on Rapa Nui than in Egypt. So there's every bay that you go into, there's a statue or a platform and whatnot. And then working with some European companies as well on some other stuff. But I think what it's really about is who you collaborate with. Sometimes as an archaeologist, I feel like I'm a race car driver and I have that jacket on with all the patches of everyone that sponsors me. But I'm really honored that I can add a new patch today and put on the St. Charles History Museum. So it's an honor to collaborate further. But yeah, no, outstanding. And I'm just really impressed. You know, we're sort of, you know, in a time where the humanities are under attack. And we're seeing lower enrollments in things like archaeology, anthropology, geography. We do want to see that next generation come in, but we do stand on the shoulders of ancestors, great ancestors, which are you all. So I'm hoping to motivate you. And I saw some little ones here in the audience. You're awesome right there, by the way, because they're the ones that are going to continue to grow on your shoulders. So very important to have that. We do a lot of stuff with the scouts, which I really like. I find the college kids are already brainwashed. I got to go younger generation to mold them and find the next Indiana Jones. So I definitely go inside there. Now, if you want to see some more sort of academic stuff, I would suggest for all of you, if you have the time, get yourself a membership with Academia and ResearchGate. They're free. They're the ways that you can get at scientific publications. And if it's under embargo or under some type of paywall, just write the individual and just say, hey, I'm interested in your research, and you will make their day. Let me tell you, because there's like 6 people that read our stuff, so it's awesome. And then really to have this many people in the crowd is outstanding, because it's usually just my mom and dad. So this is like a really big deal for me here, so I appreciate it. I have a YouTube channel, which I have a lot of videos, and I'll highlight sometimes where maybe you can go there for some further information, because I don't have as much time as I'd like to. So. And then last but not least, one of my new jobs is the editor of Illinois Antiquity. This is a journal that comes out, it's a quarterly, that highlights Illinois archaeology in general. You get it for free if you're a member of the Illinois Association for Advancement of Archaeology, or the IAAAs. So although I don't want to take any donors away from St. Charles, if you're interested to get a magazine that's made between us and North Central College, we really like to highlight what we're doing, because we get lots of questions. Everyone knows archaeology from Easter Island or Machu Picchu or the Mayans, but everyone's like, there's archaeology in Illinois? We have 13,000 years of archaeology, and we'll talk about some of the more important sites as I sort of give you a walkthrough. Okay, but I really want to say thanks to all of y'all, especially the board here and all of the members. Especially Steve, Eric, Mary, and Pat, who have done everything to get me in to come in today. I really appreciate it. It's great to see that we work together, we collaborate together. That's why they built the statues on Easter Island. It was to work together in family units and group units. So I'm really appreciative that we can build a Moai together today. There is a last little push for the podcast that should be coming out sometime soon. I think after this we're going to film tape a little bit, just a little follow-up about what we talked about today. I think this St. Charles History Chronicles is great. I did some stalking of what was being done here, and I'm just really impressed with the output of this museum and the staff, and then the clientele. You guys are really top-notch, and to see this room completely filled, I congratulate all of you. It's not easy to keep history alive, and it's sad. And I just hope chats like this or the new generation come up can grab it and move forward, okay? Okay, enough, let's get into this. So what's really come in fashion right now are these ideas of land acknowledgements. In Australia, they call them call to countries, where you go about acknowledging the groups that have come before us, all the Native American groups. And I would like to, in a simple way, honor Illinois' traditional custodians, both past and present, both near and far. But the question sort of becomes is, who are Illinois' First Nation groups? Can anyone from the audience name me some groups that we know are in this area or were in this area? Potawatomi? Okay, Black Sauk, yeah? Wabansi, okay, so people, good. So those are individuals. What about larger tribal entities? Ojibwa, very good. Kickapoo, excellent. Peoria, yeah, they were definitely moving in there. We have to think that natives aren't points. They're not like cities on the map. Native groups are polygons, and they move. They have much more ranges. And depending the time of the year, they're moving north-south. Depending on what resource scheduling is being made, they run east-west. Winnebago, okay, is part of the Ojibwa, right? Sauk, another one, great. This I'm pretty impressed, because of those groups, how many of them are federally recognized tribes in Illinois? None, 0. That's our first sort of point of emphasis. There are no federally recognized tribes in Illinois. And that's what makes it very difficult for me as an archaeologist, because we want to collaborate with First Nation groups. We want to have new generations coming forward, but who do we work with? And that's sort of, here's just a short list. These are the groups that we most would recognize, and you guys nailed it already with sort of the Anishinaabe with the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwa, Ottawa, or Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. Those are the three, but we have to realize those are the latest groups to come in our area. We've had other groups that have been here already. And most of the artifacts that we're gonna look at today have no relationship to the three fires, the Council of the Three Fires. So a lot of times we immediately assume all these artifacts are from the Potawatomi. That's not correct. They don't represent the Potawatomi. Potawatomi come in much later in that timeline. These represent archaeological cultures from thousands of years ago that have no connection. Sure, they're from the same land. Sure, they have similar roots, but they are not directly related. And those are some things we're trying to get people to think about, some things with deep time. So I find that land acknowledgements, they have a lot of bark, but little bite, right? They make you feel good for the 30 seconds you say them, and then you go back into doing what you do. So the question then is, what can we do to better understand our traditional custodians? Well, you're doing it right here. You're educating yourself. I'm outreaching. We're putting names to faces. We're putting ideas to artifacts. We're trying to understand this deep time that happens before 1830s and goes back 13,000 years. That's sort of what I want to deal with. And the problem is because we know with the movement of pioneers and colonizers into the New World, we're not going to say that all natives are living in peace and harmony. There's conflict. All groups have conflict. But what the natives did very well in these earlier cultures were conflict resolutions. And they had really good means to work out. But what's happening is that it's like an accordion. And as these groups start to get pushed, we know by the mid-1600s, the Illini are the most dominant group in our area. And notice that they're more like a polygon. Can you guys see that in the back? Is that all right? Best as we can up there. But you're going to notice the Iroquois, they're starting to push back by the French with time. They start to get some power, and they very much expand all the way in Illinois. And because they're backed by the French, they have access to guns, they have access to materials, and that lets them push and basically end that buffer zone with the Illini, and it starts to push so many more groups up into Wisconsin. So by 1680, we see much more groups on the other side of Lake Michigan that were never there, right? We can keep going. We see the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, member of the 5 native groups from New York. They start to wane out, and then groups start to dominate. Notice the Potawatomi are not even in Illinois by 1700. They're not even here yet. They haven't made that push inside here. So again, if we want to say the most typical thing, these are all Potawatomi artifacts, they're not. This is different groups that created this. And then by the end, you see Potawatomi stretch all the way around Lake Michigan. You see the Ho-Chunk. We know the Fok, the Sauk, they get pushed off. The Kickapoo reside, the Peoria. So we have these groups that basically get isolated in time and space. Before, they were interacting. They were moving north, south, east, and west, moving with the cardinal directions, moving with the change of the seasons and the resource scheduling that they have, okay? So we look at 1800s. I know this is just a crash course. We spend a whole class just on this. But I'm just trying to bring us up to the present. You're going to see by the 1800s, that's where the Council of the Three Fires really hit. The Potawatomi, the Ojibwa, and the Ottawa. That's our Council of the Three Fires. Those are the most that are acknowledged in our land acknowledgements because they're the ones that were here when most of the pioneers are on the landscape, okay? One important attribute that starts to move these Potawatomi into it will be the Chicago Treaty of 1821. It's basically this L shape right here that then is pushing groups further in, and this was a big push so the Potawatomi start coming around as well. And we see their movement through. So we can sort of trace slowly but surely, the movement of these groups as they're getting this accordion, right? And then, in some places on the Mississippian, there's already Plains group living there. And they're starting to get, but I think the saddest, and I think one of the biggest to say it this way, the biggest movements of ethnocide and genocide and ecocide that has ever happened were probably through the 1830s for our First Nation groups. Andrew Jackson, because he was a prospector, he believed that areas in the Great Smoky Mountains was full of silver. And he wanted to be able to have prospecting open up to those areas where the Cherokee had been living along with the 5 civilized tribes, right? So this act gets pushed in here. It's a bill. This was Senate Bill 102. You can read some of the legislation, but in short, all it's saying is natives need to be moved to the other side of the Mississippi. No questions, no discussion. They're removed unless they sign specific treaties. And as we know, these treaties never really held weight. A lot of times individuals were fed alcohol or they were misrepresented their land claims, and these groups are slowly getting pushed and pushed and pushed. But now government is being, these removal agents are being backed by a federal law. And that's quite sad because we start to see a variety of horrible activities. I'm sure we all know about the Trail of Tears. There were multiple trails of tears that we have. We have groups that are being relocated onto the other side, and it reminds me of being stuck at O'Hare on the tarmac during a rainstorm, and you have all these planes and they can't go anywhere. Well, that's basically what's happening after this treaty. And the government is slowly, between Nebraska, between Oklahoma, it is slowly starting to create these tracts of lands that they are being themselves moved on to. I've heard some percentages that 70% of native life was lost during Trails of Tears. But it's interesting because around this 1830 time in Illinois, there is some pushback from the natives. And I heard you brought up Black Hawk. Wasn't a chief, he was a war captain, right? He was never a chief. He was, but he was really, sorry for the language, pissed off by the St. Louis Treaty that happened in the early 1800s. He was already upset that he was seeing groups being displaced. And once his group was moved in 1830s, Sauk and the Fox, he was considered, on the side of the Brits. He made a push back onto the other side of the Mississippi. And that's what starts the conflict, the war. The only war in American history that's named after a person, right? And he has these certain skirmishes. He's fighting the Wisconsin militia, the Illinois militia, the Michigan militia. He's getting some little wins along the way. The groups that he had consolidated with are breaking away because they're lining up with the American groups. The treaties are coming into play. You have these enforcers of the Indian Removal Act, and sadly, as we know, his whole group is pretty much wiped out. And it ends the only real offensive against the U.S. sort of government about that. But interestingly, in this 1831, Naperville, where I work, was founded as a city in 1831. Warrenville, where I live, 1833, it's founded. You have the Chicago Treaty of 1833, which was the last bit of Potawatomi succeeding all of their land, right? And this is quite sad because now this is a reaction to Black Hawk's War. This is a reaction to trying to have a larger land grab and basically have all of the land to the Mississippi. And the Potawatomi that was being negotiated by Billy Caldwell, which is a really great book out there. The Trail of Billy Caldwell out there by Susan Kelly, I believe. If you have a chance to read that, she documents this process. But what we'll find interesting for us is that's when Charleston, right, comes into play, right? So we see in 1833, the same time that the Chicago Treaty is being signed, we see Charleston starting to become formed by the city, which was already on top of Potawatomi land, which were already people have been living here for 13,000 years before them, right? So when you start to bring all the puzzle pieces together, it's pretty well all connected. And I'm just so happy for Eric and Steve, because in our times here, they've been teaching me about St. Charles things that I didn't know. So you never stop learning. You always collaborate with people that, diamonds make diamonds or iron sharpens iron. So they were giving me some of the the cliff notes about Shelby and William Franklin, how they were here in 1833. They come back and, like proud immigrants, bring their families with them. That is a natural process of this world, of immigrants and people moving into better lives. I always say in my classes, immigration is humanity. We are none of us here, even Native Americans, are not from this land. They migrated their ways in 14,000 years ago. So really everyone is a migrant to North America, everybody, not even Native Americans. So I always like that bit because my grandma used to take me to Charleston Mall all the time, right? To go shopping, and so I always knew that Charleston was actually the first city's name, but that city, there was always a Charleston, Illinois down south. So they couldn't keep that name. So there was the famous lawyer Jones, I think, and he said, let's change it to St. Charles. And that doesn't start till 1839. But a year before St. Charles becomes St. Charles, the Potawatomi faced the biggest challenges of their life, which was known as not the Trail of Tears, but the Trail of Death. And some 70% of the Potawatomi are moved all the way into Kansas, through Missouri, and thousands of Potawatomi perish in that process. Yeah, and so there's just one more. It's a general known as the Trail of Tears, which it's actually now it's part of the National Park System, and they have certain sites that you can visit. It's very cool. You can drive around. But the Potawatomi is sad, and you'll notice it's sort of southern of where we're at. That main trail that goes on through, and they were pushed, like we said, onto the other side of the Mississippi.
There's a monument in Lafayette.
Yeah, absolutely.
Starts there.
Yeah, there's a lot of small. There's
There's
more.
a huge monument to the general that kicked them out.
That's right.
Nothing to the Indians.
Sure. So we're seeing a lot of, and I don't want to be political. It's not about being woke. I think that term is not used correctly. It's just about remembering and honoring. I think if we can change some of that that language about what we're trying to be woke about, I think what we're trying to understand is that there was a legacy before us. History is before 1830, and prehistory goes back 13,000 years. So I'm really I'm trying to challenge you guys to think about this deep time that we have in the state and St. Charles. 1841, this is what basically the treaties and the reservation lines are going to start from here. You're going to notice that most groups, so the 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokee, the Creek, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, Osage, they're in the southern portion. The Shawnee coming from Indiana, Ohio, Ottawa, Delaware, all the way out from the east. Most of the Illinois groups are going to be found in this mid area, and then the other Illinois groups are going to be found Potawatomi, Sauk, and Fox. But notice there is not one group in Illinois, because we were a removal state. And that's why it gets very difficult when I, as an archaeologist, say, which group do I talk with? Which group do I outreach with? A group that was here for a long time? A group that was pushed through? A group that never lived here but went through the Trail of Tears? Who do I collaborate with? And these are issues that we deal with on a daily basis. The big manifest destiny, as we know, 1845. I think for some people, they see it more than just this manifest destiny. If you notice here in the very famous photo, you'll see some of these natives being pushed as settlers are coming in this accordion effect, right? As they're working their adapting to this lifestyle. And for most of it, it's a sad situation. And what we see are, some 70-80% of natives removed and never really going back to the lifestyles that they had. So these are the things we have to wrestle with as a community. I've seen this in Easter Island, in Australia. I've seen it in groups that I've worked with, that once we just acknowledge that these things happen, we can work on bridges to go forward. And as long as we're an informed group of people, we're going to be, a little bit better as a community. So I know that's a little bit Debbie Downer. And I just wanted to end with, there are more than 600 federally recognized tribes in North America, in the United States. From this map in blue are where all the reservations are located today. What do you notice about Illinois? Right? Nothing. What do you notice about the majority of sort of eastern Midwest United States empty, because it was a big push to move these First Nation groups off. And then why you have so much concentration is because these are many of the groups that were already there that survived because they were the latest sort of contacted by the law. So when you move out to the Southwest, you still see some vibrant groups that sort of live the way they do because they had a little less contact. They had more contact from the Spaniards and Mexicans from the South. And then obviously the very rich First Nation groups that exist all the way through the West Coast. Although there are no living Native Americans, I mean, now we have, I think there's 30,000 natives that have ethnic claims that live in Chicago. They represent some 150 tribal nations. What we have the most of Illinois is Native American bone remains, human remains. So it's this is so wild to me to go from no protection, but because we were a removal state, and because of the Illinois River Valley and the Mississippi and Dupe and Fox and the Kankakee and the Des Plaines, this area was completely loaded by our traditional custodians. Some have talked about millions of people living in Illinois in the past. But what ended up happening, you can notice the highest peaks of red are where the most native remains bones are kept. And Illinois is number 2 of all the states that keep osteological or bone remains. Most of them are found at the Illinois State Museum and at Dixon Mounds. Those are the 2 largest areas. And in fact, I believe some of you would have been at the chat from Brian and Joyce Otsberg when they talked about the mound site and a lot of those native remains through NAGPRA, which is our Native American Graves and Protection Act, Repatriation Act. They were sent down to ISM, Illinois State Museum, and that's where they sit till today. So you'll notice where we have a lot of the First Nation groups that are today, those remains, the osteological remains are not there, but the living ancestors are there. So I just show you those 2 graphs to have you think about where our living ancestors are at and where, what we'd say in Easter Island, the Iwi Tapuna, the past ancestors, who are just as important as the living ancestors. And if we really care for humanity, it doesn't matter if you're dead or alive. They still share that human aspect. So this was from a ProPublica report. But times are changing, which is good. And there's more recent laws that have been put into place. And NAGPRA, that was passed in 1990 to deal with all of First Nation remains, was a little toothless. Now there's been addendums and additions, especially led by the Hawaiian contingency. And the Hawaiians are interesting because they deal and see what the Maori have done in New Zealand. And because they saw how that government interacted with their Iwi Tapuna, the Hawaiians got wise by how another culture dealt with their colonizing group. They rewrote some of the laws and doctrine, and now NAGPRA will be updated coming up. So there is change happening. Logan Pappenfort, he's a Peoria. He moved back, and his story is quite exceptional. He was a chief for the Peoria, but studied anthropology, right? The study of humans. And he took the job as the curator there. And between him and Dr. Brooke Morgan, who's at the Illinois State Museum, they're repatriating not only remains back to Illinois, but they're also repatriating remains back to Australia. Because groups at one time, there was a big push to gather bones. And bones were being put in museums so they can be studied through osteometrics and a variety of techniques. And now these remains are finally going back home to be repatriated. So although there's the doom and gloom, right? And I know that it starts out doom and gloom, I think there is hope. I really do. And I'm proud of my colleagues who are working to put this hope going forward, but I'm more proud to see this many people interested in the past and the right way about studying it, protecting it, and moving forward as a community with it. And I'm really happy about that. So that just was, I get a lot of those questions, so I figured I could sort of start out with that section, and I can always answer more questions if you have them. Anything in specific, maybe when we're having a drink, or those awesome cookies that are actually in the size of projectile points, we can talk about that. But the mainstay of this talk was about how then can we use things like archaeology, which is the study of the human past. I don't do dinosaurs, okay? That's paleontology. So please don't ask me a dinosaur question. I don't know. I'm not gonna lie to you. I like them about this much, okay? Archaeology just studies human beings for the last, 200,000 years that we've been this species of Homo sapiens, right? So that's archaeology. Museumology is really important, and that's why I give my hats off to the St. Charles Museum, is because this is a very important bit to piece together the past, because a lot of private collections get donated. Interpretation, look how much information and context is found throughout. These aren't just artifacts that are just on the wall. There's some information, there's provenance, there's provenience, there's an oral tradition. We're able to see these artifacts not just as things, but as stories. And I really applaud what this museum has done, just looking around at the stories and that people could come in. So we need that, because a lot of times in the museum, that's where we can do material culture studies. So someone like the Field Museum, on the 3rd floor, there's an entire suite of techniques that I can use to analyze artifacts. Geochemistry, different types of dating techniques. So museums, research museums, are just as important, because they can actually analyze and investigate what the museum holds. So that's why I think this partnership sort of started, is because they're curating. It's a big job to curate. It's not easy. All of the materials that you need, the knowledge, to have the proof checking. So not all the time, because they have so many things here. I believe in total 25,000 items in total, about 10,000 photographs. Like, that's a lot for a group to deal with. So what you need then is to have specialists come in and look at specific portions of the past. So my whole goal then was to look at these 1,000, 2,500 pieces as best as we could in 2 days, and to give you guys a sense of what this material holds. So that's why I'm going to try to bring all of these, the archaeology, the museumology, material culture studies, so we can better understand those Native Americans that we just discussed through a timeline approach. This is my favorite image. Can we just turn the lights off for 3 seconds? I love this. This is good, great. This is how I want to reprogram. I know you do. Okay, I'm out of here. That's it. I'm done. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. It was great. Where's the food at? I'm out of here. I'll keep my eye on you all day now. What I want you guys to think about is every layer could represent anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 years. This is hypothetical, right? What we try to do in archaeology and paleoecology in these fields is, it's like putting together a puzzle. Each of these subfields give me a little bit of the puzzle that I could put together. So usually in archaeology, I have to collaborate with a lot of people way smarter than I am. And they deal with flora and fauna and history and climatology. We were talking a little bit earlier about earthquakes and geodynamic movement. I mean, there's a whole variety. And what we do when this puzzle comes together, it gives us an idea of how humans have been in this this landscape for anywhere between 13 to 15,000 years in Illinois. But we're finding that there's more than the story has been told. We're starting to find sites now that go back 20,000 years. So we're really pushing out our knowledge of the past. So we can sort of use these levels then as what we call cultural history phases. And they're usually denoted by the time lapse that they include. And there's certain technologies and hunting styles that are used in each one of these layers, okay? But I always have to start discussions with environment, because humans are really connected to their environment. We know that. How many of you are gardeners? I'm sure every hand's gonna go up in here, right? We've had a very long relationship with horticulture and geoterracing and changing our landscape, but sometimes the landscape is stronger than us. So between 26 and about 21,000 years ago, this was the glacial maximum. So if we were sitting here 26 to 21,000 years ago, we'd all be dead, because there'd be a big glacier that had crushed all of us right now. The land didn't exist. The DuPage River didn't exist. The Fox didn't exist. We're a very young river system. this whole part, because glaciers were smashing that down, okay? Now, you'll also notice there's not that much movement for people to come in what they call the ice-free corridor, which is between the two largest glaciers that we know of at the time. So everything's coming in from Berezhnia, and we have a lot of great proxies that show a lot of the archaeological culture that we have in Russia is the same we find in Alaska and Canada, because these groups are sort of coming across. Now, in this situation, if we have sites that are dating to 22,000 years ago, and for example, in White Sands National Park, they just found a track walkway of a whole bunch of young kids walking in the ground, stepping in the puddles of large megafauna as they were splashing their feet. We dated that, or the team dated that, to 22,000 years ago, which goes much farther than anyone believed. But the question is, if the idea that they come through this ice-free corridor and it's blocked up, how did they do that? Well, we think there are two routes now. One is the ice-free corridor that opens up around 13,000, 14,000 years ago, and this other route, what we call now the Kelp Highway. And the groups that would have been already in those areas are seafarers. They're awesome. They probably had small boats. They probably had seal stomachs that they could use as floats. They were already attacking mammals that were living close to the ocean, and they were able to touch and make their way all the way probably down to South America by 15,000 years ago. But there's other migrations that are moving through once the ice age is coming to an end and these ice-free corridors start to open up. So it's important to think about that. The story changes. When I started college in 1997, I went to Canada, and my professor said, it's the ice-free corridor. It's the only way that they came through. And now I'm telling you a story that proves my professor wrong. So the thing is, history is always refined. Pre-contact period is always refined. We need to have these studies come online. They need to be sponsored to understand our past. So this is what I call the deep time map. Like I said, we know with Charleston being founded in the 1830s, most of us, when we look around this room, 95% of this room talks post-1830. There's only one section, and when you enter, that is 1% of what's on the offering here, but that's the most time that we have. So if we really want a good representation, and I like Eric's point, it's like the clock metaphor. You've got a clock, 12 to 11. Well, humans have been on this planet for basically 1 minute, and they've been in the New World for 1 second of an entire clock, right? A lot of other things are going geologically and with the paleogeography as well. So we break these up into a variety of phases, and I'll show you an easier one. But my second point of emphasis would be like, let's think about deep time. Let's extend our mind to realize that these proud First Nation groups have been custodians of this land for 13,000 years, which is something like 680 generations. 680 generations of people have come before us. We are a fart in the wind. So we are the sand on the beach, okay? But we are the most powerful because we're here right now. And we can make decisions, and we can make a better place going forward. So in a more organized way, I've just put the main phases, and it's more complicated than this, like anything, but this is like the matrix, and I'm just trying to give you a sort of formatting program here, some software. So we see 4 main phases. If you can remember Palm, Paleo, Archaic, Woodland, Mississippian, okay? Those are usually divided according to late, middle, and early, because some of them you'll notice last for 8,000 years, 7,000 years. And as we get more archaeological sites and artifacts dated, it's easier for us to basically put sites in their chronology. And in Illinois, it's amazing. There's over 4,000 sites we have in Illinois that have been documented, and they all fall. The majority of what we see, though, is because Illinois, because of the glaciers, they don't leave these areas to 13, 14,000 years ago.
our area is very young, and because of that, the people just couldn't come in yet. But as soon as those glaciers start to recede, as soon as it starts warming at the end of the Pleistocene, what we start to see are all those megafauna tracing that movement of glaciers. And who's tracing the megafauna? We are. So it's all about that. Then we have two other periods that would be more considered historic archaeology, with our colonial and American. And when we discussed this with Steve and Eric, they were going to discuss a little bit of the history, and there's some artifacts out there from your shed that we just pulled out. And the idea is for you guys to see analogies between what the past was, what the present is, and you're going to realize we're exactly the same. 13,000 years of continuation. All right, let's start with the first one. This is what Illinois looks like about 11,000 years ago. It's quite cool, almost a steppe, a lot of hardwood trees, a variety of megafauna, so everything from woolly mammoths, mastodons, and as I said, as these glaciers are receding up and humans are following behind, we get really good at hunting these things. We are Mother Nature's best predator, okay? We kill everything on this planet. There's no, I can't, we have become the dominant force, right? And because of that, it seems a lot of these animals do become extinct by our own hands and tools, but also environmental change. It's like a perfect storm, and we see it getting warmer. A lot of these animals perhaps are really shaggy. They need the colder temperature. They don't evolve as fast as the cold is changing. This is on your name tags then. All of you have an artifact. We've dialed all of you in, and the goal is, if you can have a look, how old are you? Not your real age, but how old are you, right? So if you could take a look, hopefully I'll pass by your artifact, and then maybe you can be clever enough to figure out which artifact you are. When we're dealing with the paleo, because we're dealing with a lot of hunting, we're going to see a variety of tools that are then dedicated to hunting. But the most important bit of the hunter is the flint knapper, okay? The stone tool maker. This would have been the crucial member of that nucleus, of that group living together, because they use things like choppers and hammer stones to basically work a core down into a point. So we have to realize everyone, when they see stone tools, they immediately think arrowheads. Arrowheads are very young. Arrowheads, we'll see, don't begin until the woodland period. What we're noticing we have here are spears, or what we call PPKs, projectile points or knives. Sometimes we can't differentiate, are they having a short handle as a knife, or do they have it as a dart for throwing? And those are things we work through for analysis. We have end scrapers, which are really good to take flesh and meat off hides, right? Drills, which are for a variety of purposes, and we'll see that's an American drill. We sort of have tools that identify North America, and drills are one of those. Because a lot of times they'd have a spear point like this. They don't want to lose that raw material because they're moving so much in the landscape, they're not going to go back to that source. And if I break my tip, I'm not going to throw that to the side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down to a drill. So that American ingenuity that we all love, that we all have, begins 13,000 years ago, right? It's a long period. So flint knapper. Now we have the most common culture that I'd highlight here, and maybe if I get the lights back on. These ones I don't mind if you touch. Anything on the table, we're going to keep our paws off. What we start is with a very famous culture called Clovis. For many years, it was called the Clovis first hypothesis, that this was the culture. You'll notice their distribution. They're around for a little bit less than 1,000 years, but they explode on this landscape. We find Clovis in Illinois. We find Clovis all throughout, and we even find Clovis through that ending of the ice-free corridor. So this map shows where our high points are at, and you'll notice where we're at, we've got a couple larger sections of high percentage. So when I pass around there, I kept them in there. You'll see on the card it identifies what it is. I've got 3 Clovis for you to look at first. you could just pass them down. Notice raw materials, notice changes in color, and then what I really want you to look for on there is there's something called a flute. It's a very precise cutout of the rock that you can put a composite weapon or a stick or a staff in there and then tie it around with a variety of materials. I also have a side scraper, a scraper, and then a graver, so you can just see the variety of materials that these early groups were using. And some of them are like Swiss Army knives. You might have one thing that's used for a variety of purposes, but those Clovis points, this is that flute that's inside there. The main job of this is when I'm running at that mastodon, I can put a full stake in them, right? I can break that piece off. I have another Clovis with me. I put it inside, I tie it off, and I go again. They didn't kill that with the Clovis doesn't kill it with their stick. What they do is they wait till the animal bleeds out, right? With so many little puncture holes inside like a balloon, and you're taking a little pin, and that animal they would track and walk and follow until it comes down. Now, what are they hunting? Well, there's a variety of cool megafauna in Illinois, really all throughout the United States. But in Illinois, we have some evidence of things like cave lions, saber-toothed tigers, the Harlan muskox, which was huge, the two types of woolly mammoth and mastodon. And the way you tell those apart is you look at their teeth. They had a different diet. So woolly mammoths tend to have ridges, really small ridges on their teeth as they ground. And then mastodon have sort of couplets. And it's very easy to tell the two apart by looking at their teeth. And we can see that. Glyptodons, teratorns, which were basically vultures with a 9 to 10 foot wingspan. They were really good at carom, and some have argued they were the ones that would identify groups in the area, because if we took down something, this animal would appear, and that would attract humans in the landscape together. Cave bears, camelids, and what I most represent myself with, the Jefferson sloth. So identify, I think I'm a sloth in my other life. But these animals are on the landscape, and we are effective hunters. And the idea is that we, along with the environment, really start to affect these animals and the reproduction. So I showed you the glacial maximum 26,000 to 21,000 years ago. On the top, here we have about 12,000 years ago. Notice how much these ice sheets start to get smaller and reduce. And with that, you see some animals start to retreat to the north, but it also allows other animals to move into areas. So again, this idea of an accordion. Sometimes it's open, there's lots of movement, sometimes it's closed, and people can't and things can't come in. But you'll notice that there are these changes in the landscape. So with humans and our hunting abilities, along with the changes in the environment, it's sort of a perfect storm. And many of these animals become extinct. But other animals come into the landscape or are able to live longer or breed better because these other megafauna aren't here. And we see a radical change in not only what they're hunting, but the technology to what they're hunting. And we see changes in stone tool technology. So one animal that will become crucial, as we all know, is not the buffalo, it's a bison, right? There's multiple sizes of bison in the last 10,000 years. They've evolved with us. They got smart. They learned that if I'm smaller, I can run faster and farther, right? Elk, deer, and turkey. And if I have any hunters in the audience, this is the same stuff you go for. So we've had a consistent bead on the most important species for 10,000 years on this landscape. And that's something that we share with our ancestors. So changing landscapes and changing diet breaths. These mastodon and these megafauna, they're gone. They no longer could use that technology because it's overkill. So what we see during this next phase, this sort of archaic period, is a real change in technology and sort of a specialization. Now you don't have this pan Clovis. You start to see different clusters of cultures jumping online. And this is when it gets cool, because then we can start talking about things like social organization, contact, communication, networking, exchange. 7 minutes? Yeah, okay, close. All right, so I've just pulled a whole bunch of different types of PPKs, projectile points that would be put onto an addle, which was a very cool weapon. And there's a whole variety here. One that I really highlight for you is called the St. Charles point, the dovetail, as the collectors call them. But here's just highlighting this change and the variety of maybe cultures that are on this landscape. Folsom, not Folsom Prison, any cash folks out there, but this is an exceptional point for bison hunting. And we see that at many bison kill sites. So I was just showing you a variety of from the Archaic period. Now the addle that we have here, and these addle weights, this was much more effective than just spear chucking. Now you have a little handle, the thrower, that has a small little hook that holds on to my composite weapon, that has my projectile point, and I flick the addle. And now instead of being a brute and running up to the mastodon, and now I can sit back and see that whole grouping of elk or deer. And I can have 10, 15 of my mates. 3, 2, 1, zoom. Volley of all these addles hitting multiple deer. You're protected. You're not facing the tusk and the ivory of all these larger animals. We see another variety of tools that come up: axes, blades, different types of scrapers, because now they're getting into other animals, some smaller, so they're updating their scraper technology. Again, drills, continuation of drills. But we start to see ground stone adzes come onto play. And that's sort of important because now we're starting to think about forest management. And they're starting to cut down and use wood. And that's something that's sort of important. We also know that they're still hunting and gathering. And what we'll see then is a lot of nutting and milling stones. And these are quite common in our area, especially for things like hickory. During the woodland period, hickory was very important in this area, and nutting stones would have been important. But notice the start of pendants and artwork, personal ornamentation, group identity. That's sort of our archaic. The woodland then, we see a radical change. We see a huge amount of people on the landscape. And what we're seeing, what's bringing these people together are plant domestication and use, especially the three sisters. What are the three sisters? Corn, beans, squash. Excellent. Those are typical Illinois crops. But we also had a lot of plants like goosefoot, sunflower. They're also cultivating those. Ceramics, which is using for cooking and transport. Now we see the bow and arrow. Now we can finally say we have arrowheads. They didn't exist up to this point. Villages, burials, and mounds, because people are starting to nucleate together. There's a higher form of social stratification, and we probably start to see the birth of the 1%ers. Probably the ones that are in this audience right here. So you guys are from the woodland. Just to go through, if you want to see a video about the woodland, I did a video about the Winfield Mounds and then more about the addle. It's on the YouTube channel if you want more information about that. But here, we'll see more diversification in tools. One of the most commonly is called the turkey tail, because it looks like a turkey tail. We'll see one of the largest ones of the time, the Etsy point. And then one of the oldest of them all are these awesome cookies. I mean, this thing has got to be like 500 years old. And it's great because this cookie is actually designed, I think, after what's called a Schneider's point. And the Schneider's point that we have here comes from the Mackinac catch, which was over 60 of these that were buried, probably for ritual reasons. You can look at this one, but not this one. Oh, I'll pass those around so you can see some examples from the woodland period. Scrapers, blades, some more PPKs. We start to see some beautiful celts come online, which were definitely used for woodworking and wood splitting. but we're also going to see things like gorgets and beads and plummets for fishing perhaps, specialists, mortal and pencils, or mano and metate, that we have the name out west. But here we start to see ceramics. And we've got two beautiful pieces when you guys can come by, and we see a variety of ceramics in this period. But these are sort of the early stuff, right, that you can see. And then the middle woodland, we start to see things more, scrapers as well, arrowheads coming online, drills once again. But notice copper. Copper gets used throughout a long period in North American history. And actually I'm working on a site by Kelowna, Illinois, that has copper use 9,000 years ago. We're working on that paper at the moment, but it wasn't for tool use, it was for offerings in a large fire. So copper may have been more than just as we see it as a metal, it was seen as something spiritual or sacred. Bones, and probably back in my old day, there were three things I very much loved to do, would be fishing, smoking, and listening to music. So we start to see copper and bone fish hooks, stone pipe out of soapstone. There's a lot of soapstone quarries. Different types of awls. And then because we're dealing with agriculture and horticulture, we see both stone and shell hoes that are being used. And I believe a gentleman here, maybe that, Bob was it, that actually had a nice, or someone brought me up a beautiful hoe that they had. Other types of sort of for the ladies, I want to make sure you had some bling. So we have everything from beads, pottery and stone rings, more gorgets, ear spools for the new age folks that like to put the big, ear spools inside, shell breastplates. What I like is we have pendants made of bear teeth, but also they recreate them using stone. So it's like maybe this is the Louis Vuitton and this is the ripoff, right? They basically, as they throw through, right? The ceramic starts to get much more decorated, which is quite cool, and it's identifying the different social groups that we have. Notice the turtle shell dish. I think we have a beautiful turtle shell, and I think it is part of an old dish from the woodland in this collection. Some figurines, and then by the time the late bit happens, we know the arrowheads are in full production, and they're not being used as knives. More celts for woodworking, different type of hoes, pendants, again, notice drills, the entire story. That's an American classic. And then these discoidals, which were used for a game called Chucky. And I'll talk about that in a second. Some more bone pins. Fish hooks are better designed and larger. Bird claw beads, pipes for smoking tobacco, spoons. So we see a variety of stuff in the late period, including the ceramics. And we see a lot of this Havana ware all throughout DuPage County and this river area. And then just for the last bit, I know I'm running out of time here, is the famous Mississippian period. And here, don't take my cookie, here I can just pass out some of the most famous Mississippian pieces that come from Cahokia, the city of the sun. If you haven't had a chance to go down there, go to Cahokia, okay? It is the only UNESCO World Heritage Site in Illinois. It's right outside St. Louis in Collinsville, Illinois. It's a 4-hour drive. It is the largest site ever made in Illinois and the largest mound site north of Mexico. And at one time, it's believed that in the greater Cahokia region, there were 30 to 40,000 people living there. It was bigger in a city than London was at the time in the 1200s. So it is one of those amazing sites. And because Cahokia has this huge sort of hierarchy, it's got specialization. The only thing it was really missing to be a true civilization was writing. There were no North American groups that wrote on pieces of paper until Sequoia does it with the Cherokee. That comes a little bit later. But oral tradition and singing and dance, that was the way they put their information. I did another YouTube vid about that. If you're interested, you can go check that out. But the City of the Sun to me is one of my favorite places. I did some filming down there But the artifacts are just as exceptional. Definitely a lot of arrowheads, drill, just trying to stress the importance of that. Chisels and knives. The gentleman, there's your flint hoe that you have there. But sometimes they're using hoes made of deer spatulas as they're adapting a little bit to conditions. But I think some of the figures and some of the artwork of the Mississippians are the greatest. From librets or earplugs, different types of pendants from shell, pipes made of pottery and stone, effigies, beads. I mean, they were a really gifted group. And then their ceramics were unparalleled. The one mug up there is a ceremonial mug, and it seems they're fermenting some type of, it's called black beer, and it seems to be being used by the chiefs, maybe during big festivals and initiations, rites of passage. And then we can identify them by, are they from the upper Mississippi region or the lower region, which extends all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So that was, I could go on about one of those periods for days and days, but I know I got a timeline and Steve's already given me the hook. So I figured, is it a good time to do some questions, comments? Can we do that right now? Yes, sir, let's go.
When do you think they started to use fire for cooking?
They probably,
The ability to create a fire.
well, we know the first fire user is probably Homo erectus, and that's hundreds of thousands of years ago, right? We see cave sites that have soot on all of the cave tops, so they're having fires inside them where they're, probably cooking. They definitely came over with fire technology, and the idea is some of those drills perhaps may have been the way that they were starting fires. Good question. In the back, sir.
When I was a kid, my dad took me and we went to the Boy Scouts out to Johnson's Mound. And excuse the expression, but we called it an Indian burial mound.
Sure.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. I mean, and let's talk about terminology. Indian is more or less now the preferred term. I mean, it's been a flip. A lot of groups that I've consulted with, they don't want to be called Native Americans because they were here before America, and they don't feel that that's the proper term. I use traditional custodian, and I pull that from Australia because they weren't landowners. They were polygons. They moved through the landscape. So yes, you can say that that's a burial mound or an effigy mound because a lot of times they'll have shapes. But if you have human beings inside, I think you're right on proper.
Was that that was a flat plane, and because of the mound, that's just body after body after body?
So, a lot of times it's sections, right? So you'll have groups, families that were buried, especially the upper class, that 1%. So they would be inside, and then like in Cahokia, there's a very famous Mound 72. And I think it has something like 400 people in the inside of that ridgetop mound, along with many of those artifacts from Cahokia that you're looking at right now, buried with the chief. So I think you're right on with your assessment.
But wasn't Johnson's Mound a glacial mound?
A glacial mound, like pushed, like a moraine.
Right, I thought that's what it was.
Was there human remains found inside?
I don't think so. Was there?
Because that's the main question. If there were human remains found inside, then that's what it would be, a burial mound. If it doesn't, it could be an offering or effigy mound, or the law I have, when in doubt, it's natural.
Okay.
That's honestly, when people say, I got this piece, what is it? I'm like, natural, 90% of the time. We like to say things are what they are because they're ergonomic or they fit. So I'd have to see where their cultural remains, where their osteology remains. If those two are in there, we classify them as that. If not, and they're more geological, it might be a moraine. Yeah? Yes, ma'am.
This week, in the news, and I unfortunately cannot remember which state it was, but the state has decreed that every school needs to remove its team name and mascot if it is
Sure.
Indian related.
Sure.
And as a graduate of the University of Illinois, I was horrified by what happened to Chief Alinowick because unlike some of the other mascots that they made fun of, I found him so inspiring.
Yes, ma'am.
So what's your reaction?
It's a slippery slope. It's a double-edged sword there, right? The question is, was that change brought upon the native group, or was that change brought about politricians? Politrictions, yeah. Excuse me, sorry, that's just my little Illinois term. So, I think that it's a slippery slope. Was that consulted? Was that decision made? Some groups are honored that their school, if there's proper consultation and the tribal citizens vote through the democratic process to say, we approve that, I'm all for that.
Well, and you were saying there is no Indian tribe as such
Sure,
here
in Illinois. That's what makes it that's why it's so difficult, this discussion, because I don't have a protocol to go back to. But yes, I would say I support, if the Native group was consulted and made that decision, I would say yes.
But there was no Native group.
So then then I question, who's making that choice? Yes,
I picked up a book in Rock Island, Illinois, a museum. It's called Black Hawk's Dictation. Is that correct?
I mean, I don't know the context of that.
It was supposedly
His sort of, there are some written notes that was transcribed.
Yes.
He was a very interesting individual, especially if you go out to Oregon. Have you seen his statue that's there, that's representing his sort of time? He was like he was a fortunate leader in an unfortunate time.
This was in the Rock Island moment.
Yes, yeah, makes sense, absolutely, definitely makes sense. So yeah, that's something we would go to in that historical sense to glean information about the past. Remember, it's linking all those puzzle pieces together. So there's a lot written about him. So yes, I would say those are
That's
correct.
a real strong and a lot about Black Hawk.
Perfect, good one. Yes,
I noticed that there was a heavy concentration of reservations in northern Wisconsin relative to the surrounding
Yep.
areas. Why was that?
that big push. So what we saw was like that Illinois, that Mississippian border, as long as they were going north, and it wasn't a clear cut under the Michigan, because they wanted that clear path to the west. And as long as people were getting pushed that way and farther out into the Dakotas, no worries, no harm, no foul. But we don't want you anywhere near that river, and we don't want you anywhere near south of the Lake Michigan. And that was, and Jackson had a lot of those plans in place. So I mean, he was our president. We respect our president, but we all know presidents don't make good decisions, and I don't think that was a really good one. Yes, ma'am.
I may be misunderstanding, but when this lady spoke about Indian names being removed from schools and all of that, doesn't that say that Illinois hasn't changed at all?
I think you can argue that.
Or progressed at all with regard to accepting the culture
Sure,
that was here prior?
I agree with you.
Still trying to shove everything out.
It is. I just always fall back to that line of consultation. What group was where was the consult? When did it happen? Was it just a dry email? Did they come together and have a discussion and a dinner? Because there's something called Indian time. It's much slower. There's protocol involved. You have to spend seasons together before you build that trust and that rapport. On Rapa Nui, when I did my PhD, I had to wait 11 months to get permits, because I had to go fire pit to fire pit and fishing hole to fishing hole to meeting and tell what I was doing, where sometimes that discussion just isn't done. So it goes back to, we are still working it out, and my best is I have my email of people that I work with, and we do the best we can. Maybe we'll do one more question. Is that cool? Yes?
Well, just keep me local. Potawatomi Park, it's named after the Potawatomi
Sure.
Indians.
I think
Well,
that's
is there anything special there, or just it's named after that?
Well,
you know?
we can tell by the end of the 1700s, by the start of the 1800s, they're here for decades. So that was a crucial, important bit. North-south, crossing the DuPage for east-west, that was a route of transport. So being on that bit of the river would have been crucial. So I could see that's where I'd want to set up camp. I think that's good. So I know that we had see some artifacts. I'll let our bosses work through their thing. I just want to say thank you very much for being a great audience. Appreciate that. I think we stick around a little bit, so if you want to